I want to go over this NPR boss, which was, kind of funny at the beginning. And then the more you learn about her, the more you're like, well, no, hang on just a second. Because she would be a very important tool in the hands of the government, and she's being paid by National Public Radio. So she is a tool of the government in many ways. Can she separate herself from her own personal beliefs? Or is that even wanted at NPR? We wanted to bring in Joe MacKinnon. Joe is a Blaze News staff writer, and he has been following up on this. Joe, take us from the beginning, from the whistleblower, if you will, all the way to Christopher Rufo, and then let's pick it up from there. So can you tell us the beginning of it, Joe?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. So Uri Berliner, earlier this month, has this damning expose in the Free Press, April 9th. He goes after NPR after having worked there for a quarter of a century as a senior business editor. He suggests that there's zero viewpoint diversity, particularly after John Lansing, the former CEO, had made it an activist organization and then allied it effectively with the Democratic Party. This is a publication, according to Berliner, that didn't want to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story, that worked with Adam Schiff to push the Russian collusion hoax. So he goes to town on NPR and draws the ire of someone who's not been on a lot of people's radar, and that's Katherine Maher, or Maher, I should say. So Maher comes up with this long response and effectively cusses him out with somewhat charitable terms. And he subsequently, Berliner is suspended, and then he resigns. So people start looking into Maher after this, because she was with Wikipedia before, but I guess, flew under the radar for a lot, particularly on the right, or among those who are critical of the government. And at first blush, she looks just like another shrill leftist. She has the obligatory photo wearing the Biden campaign hat, and she has an unhealthy obsession with race. And so that photo exists, and the tweets speak for themselves. But you keep digging, as Rufo has, and you realize really quickly that there's something more going on here. From 30,000 feet, she looks like not just a tech-savvy media queen, but someone who spent a lot of time around color revolutions in the Orient, enough to know how they might be replicated.
Okay, so hang on just a second. The campuses and boardrooms are full of leftists, but you're saying, and Christopher Rufo is saying, she is not your ordinary leftist. She's been around color revolutions. What does that mean, she's been around color revolutions? Okay,
so, one of the many interesting posts she's had, and I should note at the outset here that she's a World Economic Forum world global leader. She's worked with the World Bank. She's worked with various NGOs that are in the tech, comms, and foreign policy space. So around 2010, 2011, and Rufo chronicled her travel itinerary. She's with the National Democratic Institute, and that's a spinoff of the National Endowment for Democracy, committed to, exactly. Well, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
This is an organization that tries to transition unwilling regimes to become liberal democracies.
Now, can I redefine that a little bit? It's a CIA front.
Well, Mike Benz, he was in the Trump administration at the State Department. He said exactly that. He said it's a carve-out for the CIA. And other people have said just as much. In fact, I think it was Ron Dixon at the New York Times back when he said the NDI was actively fomenting protests during the so-called Arab Spring. So, and by the way, these aren't just...
Joe, we know this. I exposed that when we were at Fox. We've known that from the beginning. It didn't take a brain surgeon to figure this out. Then when you go into Ukraine and see what they were doing and the phrases that they were using, saying, we can spread this now. We kind of perfected it in the Middle East and we can spread it. And that's exactly what we were doing in Ukraine.
Well, precisely. Ukraine, Libya, Egypt,
Yes.
Yemen, Tunisia. And so she's kind of done a pilgrimage to these toppled regimes, and in some cases as they're falling. So Rufo notes that she goes to Tunisia a couple times. She goes to Gaziantep in southern Turkey just as rebels are making inroads along the highway between Damascus and I believe it was Aleppo. And she actually said not long ago that she framed the timing differently, but she said in the aftermath of the revolutions, she was doing research on the ground with quote unquote human rights activists and independent journalists. And so she's with the NDI. She's going to Tunisia, and she raised a couple alarm bells. So there's this Tunisian cabinet official, and he basically he didn't intimate. He straight out said it's a likely case that she works for a certain 3-letter agency. And, a lot of people have been speculating about that in recent weeks.
So what is her background in broadcast and news?
Well, she deals a lot with comms. In terms of news, she's been critical of the ways that governments have weaponized their state broadcasters, which I think is rich, granted.
Right.
Progressive
she goes work
career.
Yes. But what is she? I mean, does she have a background in news? Is she a journalist? Is she? I mean, why is she? I see that she's traveled the world, that she's with the World Bank and the WEF, and she's been with NGOs and she's been around revolutions, but that doesn't necessarily scream CEO of NPR.
Well, I think Wikimedia and Wikipedia, which she ran the show for several years, she demonstrated her bona fides, and it was under her reign that it quickly became clear that this was, it's supposed to be a repository for human knowledge, right?
Right,
I know
but it's not.
Recently you talked about how memory is the key to who we are. Well, Wikipedia is instrumental to capturing and curating that memory for a lot of people. So she might not be a journalist, but she was very much, I don't want to suggest there's a causation, because she pretends that, the Wikipedia editors are working on their own. But while she's in control, there's very much a narrative curation going on, the kind that you might want at taxpayer-funded state broadcasts.
Jeez. Okay. So the rumor that she's with CIA, where did that originate?
So I mentioned she went to Tunisia a couple times, right?
Okay.
So this cabinet official is named Slim Amamou. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But Slim says in 2016, it's a bit of a retrospective. He's looking back. And I believe it was around the time that she was getting a promotion over at Wikipedia. He straight up says she's probably CIA. He's not mincing words. He says she's come over under different affiliations with the NDI, with World Bank, with USAID. And he suggests, and this is going on at Twitter at the time, still called that, he suggests that she might as well have had CIA written on her front. And so Slim was in the transitional government. He dropped out to protest so-called censorship. And he, not entirely the top of the food chain, but someone you might at least want to hear out. And so she is prickled by the suggestion. She responds saying, I'm no sort of agent. You can dislike me, but please don't defame me. But then, that brought even more scrutiny because people took notice of the way she framed that response. So Christina Pasha, she's on the DeSantis team. She noted, for instance, okay, well, you may not have been an agent, but you could just as well have been an asset.
Yeah.
But the CIA element, I think, I haven't seen any incontrovertible proof,
Sure.
But it's also largely immaterial because she's actually directly worked with the Biden administration. She's worked with and brushed shoulders with all these regime change groups. So whether or not she has CIA on a card somewhere tucked in to her desk, she might as well have been.
And this is part of the group that, I mean, Hillary Clinton, in that infamous clip where she said, "We came, we saw, he died," and laughed about it. I think who she was talking to at the time might have been Samantha Power, who is, Cass Sunstein's wife, the author of Nudge, and somebody who knows how to nudge people into new positions. But Sam now works at USAID. She's the head of USAID. So if you have the head of NPR also working with Samantha Power at USAID, that is also a CIA front.
No, absolutely. And I think it was Michael Waller in the Rufo piece. He's a national security analyst. And he said he drew that same connection with Power and intimated that Maher is part of this revolutionary vanguard movement. So, they're all in bed together by the looks of it, I should say. A little bit of distance because I don't want to mean tweet. But and then you couple this with her public comments, and then it lends even more gravity to this. Her becoming the head of NPR, which was announced.
Give me some of her public comments that I may not know.
Okay, well, I did a little bit of a deep dive. A lot of these already are circulating, but they're all troubling. So, for instance, in a 2021 interview, and this one has caught a lot of people's attention in recent days, she described the First Amendment as the top challenge in the fight against disinformation. So it's a challenge. Yeah, that's right. It's a challenge because, quote, it's a little bit tricky to really address some of the real challenges of where does bad information come from and sort of the influence peddlers who have made a real market economy around it. And by the way, when she's talking about disinformation, she means skepticism of COVID-19 vaccines, which I know in the lead up to the show, there was mention that AstraZeneca just admitted that has devastating impact. Well, so that's disinformation, according to the former head of Wikipedia. She also climate alarmism. That's a no-fly for her. So at an Atlantic Council 2021 event, she says Wikipedia isn't a free expression platform, and so that, a lot of people are wondering why. And she suggests it's really about creating content that people can have confidence in, that they can use to make determinations in their lives. And so that right to have access to high integrity content often sort of trumps the right to free speech. Now, pair that with the fact that she suggests straight out in a TED Talk that, quote, our reverence for the truth might be a distraction that is getting in the way of finding common ground and getting things done. So I don't know who that common ground belongs to, by the way, but it certainly isn't free people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to come back. Let me take 1 minute to break for a sponsor, and then I want to come back and I want to ask you. So if she was a tool, even a little bit in color revolution, what is the fear that she could do, or what is the impact she could have here in America by being the CEO of NPR? So we're talking to Joe MacKinnon, who has written extensively for the Blaze News. You can go to blaze.com and find his work on NPR's CEO, who is looking to be far worse than what anybody thought she was. We just thought she was a crazy liberal or progressive, but she seems to be possibly much more than that, including possibly working with the CIA. But she spent a lot of time around color revolutions. We'll talk about that coming up in the next break. But I just wanted to ask you, Joe, before you go, what is the impact, if this is true, that she could have with NPR at her disposal?
NPR has long been a joke. It's ineffective. Its viewership has dwindled immensely. She is shrewd. She is effective. This is an individual who had people believing that cultural Marxism is a far-right conspiracy theory when she was running Wikipedia. And all the insights she has gleaned when she was doing her, again, pilgrimage of fallen states, and her understanding that capture of a state broadcaster could ultimately mean capture of the state, means that NPR is a weapon in her hands. Potentially a weapon in her hands. There's over 1,000 stations broadcasting its NPR programming. There's thousands of employees, a bunch of bureaus across the country. Now, I don't think they're going to do business as usual. In fact, she's telegraphed that there's going to be a transformation behind the scenes. NPR was already a leftist propaganda outlet. Now, I think it's going to be used to foment, or at the very least, control the protest, and to at least have the power to weaponize various groups across the nation. You send your marching orders essentially out via NPR. So Wikipedia, and I'm surprised she left Wikipedia, honestly, because I think that's the more consequential place. But Wikipedia controls the past, and therefore can control the future.
Yes,
and I think NPR, under her helm, I think the aim anyway, is controlling the present.
Joseph MacKinnon from theblaze.com.